Hi everyone, we are now into week 4 of our English 101 course. So this week we're going to be talking about writing to reflect, basically just the main purpose of this first paper, and then some editing and revising strategies as well that you can use throughout your writing process as you write this paper, but also any essay that you write in the future, not just this one. So, first of all, as you write your reflective essay, you need to keep in mind the rhetorical situation. Sometimes we call this thinking rhetorically, but it basically means that you are considering the parts of the rhetorical situation as you write something. Think about your audience, your purpose, the subject, what details do you need to include, what can you leave out, etc. And so these particular questions are things that you should definitely consider as you write your first essay. So, first of all, what's it mean? So, what does my essay mean? What's my purpose? What am I trying to get across? What's the context? Is storytelling appropriate for that particular assignment? In this case, it is because it's a narrative essay. That's the purpose of it. What's your topic and your audience? So, this story that you're telling, how could you use this story to affect the reader's understanding of your thesis? So, the thesis is basically what you want your audience to learn from this. So, how can you tell your story in such a way that they will see the insight that you gained and then they can gain that insight as well? And what's the purpose of telling the story? Is it going to interest your readers? Along with the purpose, how long should it be? How long should the story be to accomplish your purpose? Is my purpose to reflect on this lesson I learned, which is the main purpose of it? Or maybe think of it as how can I tell this story so I can emphasize what I want people to learn? And also, so the purpose, your subject, your audience, these are going to affect your details, but also the message you try to get across. What descriptive details are meaningful to the audience? What's the purpose of the details? Well, the purpose of them is to tell the story, to bring the reader into the story with you. Can you use sensory details, concrete details to help your reader understand, to bring them into the story with you? And then what's the message you want to get across? Does the story you tell support that message? You're saying in your concluding paragraph what you learned from this. Does the rest of the narrative show how you learn that, basically? So as you plan and you write this, there's no real right or wrong way to go about planning it and drafting it. It's just whatever works for you. So remember, we have talked about the writing process, but in general, everyone will have to generate ideas. You will have to draft your essay. You'll have a main idea. So the main idea is this event that happened to you and what you learned from it. Now, you don't necessarily have to create an outline, but sometimes it helps just to figure out what events you want to talk about where. And then obviously, you're going to have to draft your essay because you'll have to write the essay. But then also think recursively and when you revise and when you edit the essay. So, writing isn't just a one and done process. You don't just write your essay, you're done, you turn in your rough draft as your final draft, you don't change anything. No, with writing, you can come back and go to specific points in the piece that you're writing. It's like, well, maybe I need more details. Maybe you take a break from it, you come back the next day and you realize, oh, I have a lot of mistakes here, or my writing isn't clear. So, with writing, you're never really just 100% done. You want your paper to be the best that it can be. And so, editing and revising, it's recursive. We do this over and over, even while we draft the paper, even while we plan and pre-write. So, the biggest things that I want to talk about, so these next strategies we're going to talk about, this will help you as you write your paper. But this is mainly what I want you to keep in mind as you, not just as you edit and revise, but keep this in mind as you're starting to draft and to flesh out the story. So there's this idea of showing versus telling whenever you write. So basically, when you write something, ask yourself, am I showing or am I telling? So can the reader understand what you see, what you feel, what you hear, what you touch. So you're basically trying to convey exactly what you went through with description. So your descriptions are so vivid, they're so thorough that your reader can almost experience this event along with you. Um, so showing versus telling, it basically just depends on the details that we use, how we decide to describe something. For instance, you could say somebody was angry. So that is telling. You're telling me she was angry. Okay, but if you really want me to experience this event the way you did, don't just tell me she was angry. How could you show me she was angry? Well, her face was pulsing with rage. Her fists, she gripped her fists together so tightly that her knuckles were white. So you're not telling me that she's angry. You're showing me she's angry. I can picture this in my head. I can see it as if I am there. So with showing versus telling, it's basically just this idea. Can the reader understand what you see, what you hear, what you feel, what you experienced? Do they feel like they're experiencing this along with you? So here's some more examples of showing versus telling. Um, Jack thought the chipmunk was skinny, so he shared his strawberries, which the chipmunk ate. Okay, you're telling me this is what Jack did, but again, you don't describe it in such a way that I can picture it in my mind. Instead, if we were showing this, instead we could say something like, after briefly hesitating, the scrawny looking chipmunk puffed up his tiny chest and scurried over to the strawberries that Jack had left on the trail. So again, there's more detail. I can picture this scene in my head. Here's another example. Logan loves dressing up for Halloween, carving pumpkins, and eating lots of candy. Okay, again, you're just telling me what Logan likes. He likes Halloween. This is what he likes. But if you want to show me that he likes Halloween, you describe how Logan is acting, how he's behaving, what's he doing. Sugar loving Logan morphed into Batman, grabbed his jack o' lantern, and took to the streets. So he doesn't just love Halloween, he has morphed into Batman. He has completely embraced this holiday. It's his favorite holiday. So again, this second one makes me feel like I am there with you in the scene. The first one, not so much. So keep that in mind as you're writing. You are trying to show us what's happening, not just telling us what's happening. Now, next I want to talk about this idea of selecting details. So sometimes in writing, especially narrative writing, it's difficult to find a balance between how much detail do I include and what can I leave out? What do I absolutely have to describe in the most detail that I can, and what can I kind of gloss over? And so in writing, there's this idea of what's called this balance between summary and scene. So whenever we are trying to select details, um, so whether you're describing or narrating or providing examples, both of these things, all of these things require you to figure out what I need to do, what details I need to include, what can I kind of briefly go over. So adding too many details makes it ponderous. It makes people not want to read anymore. Adding not enough details helps us not picture the event. And I had an example from James Fenimore Cooper. I apparently forgot to include that here. But he describes this particular scene in such a way that it just goes on and on. And he could have just briefly gone over this. Like, you could have just hit the high notes of this. So here is an example of scene versus summary. So whenever we are summarizing something, we just hear the overview of it. We don't hear all the nitty gritty details. We don't hear every single tiny little thing that happened. So think about movies and stories that we read. Sometimes narrators don't dramatize everything. Sometimes they don't describe everything. Sometimes they lack sensory details. So maybe the details aren't really important. You can still get the point across without going into exhausting detail about it. Sometimes we go with summary because you're transitioning from one event to another. Maybe we don't need to know all the details of how you got from school home. Maybe that's not important to the story, so you can gloss over it. So basically, with summary, we don't experience the scene in the same way as the narrator did, and that's okay. We don't always have to experience this in the same way the narrator did. We only need to do this for the important, for the key events. So basically, think of what do you absolutely need in your essay? What can you get rid of? What can you possibly leave out and still get the main point across, basically? So here's an example of summary. So summary, again, it gives an overview. They might be events that you gloss over. They're probably not important to the overall story. So this is an example. When they asked him whether he took the money, Ove said no. They asked again and again, but he refused to tell them what he knew, so they let him go. So this probably isn't incredibly important to the story. I don't need to know every single word that was said when they interrogated this character because that is not vital to the story. We can, move on from that. I don't necessarily need that. So they have chosen to summarize this scene. However, here's an example of if they didn't summarize this, if they decided to use scene instead of summary. When they asked him whether he took the money, Ove said nothing. He stared at the floor at the scuffed hardwood. Ove, said one of the men in suits. Ove met his gaze and knew who he was. His dad had mended his car once, a blue Opel Manta. With the big engine, he smiled amicably at Ove and gestured cursorily at a chair in the middle of the floor, as if to let him know. But when they asked him again whether he took the money, he refused to speak. They told him it was foolish not to name the thief, but when that didn't work, they told him if he didn't answer, he'd lose his job. And when that didn't work, they yelled at him, but Ove stuck to his guns, so they let him go. Now, if this was just in the background of a story, maybe I don't need to know all of these details. Maybe I just want to know, hey, when did they find this character? Maybe I want to know maybe what's going on in a different location in the story. But I don't need, in this particular example, I don't need to know all of these details of when they're interrogating him. It's not that important to the story. So I could instead just gloss over it. I could summarize it and not give that much detail to it. If it's not key to the story, then it's okay to gloss over it. For instance, if you are writing about your first football game, I don't need to know all of the details of how you got to the football game. You got on the bus, you rode the bus to the game. It took this long. You did all of this on the bus when you were getting ready. If the main point of the story is what's going to occur at the game, then gloss over, then summarize how you got there, the things leading up to it. Now, if this is the key point, if this is the crucial event that you learned something from, that is when you want to get into scene. So let's move on and talk about that. So what should be seen? So it's basically a battle that writers everywhere struggle with when it comes to writing stories or writing personal narratives, or basically any type of narrative. So the thing with scenes, the thing with these key events that you want to focus on and give as much detail as possible, these seem to take place in real time. They're concrete. It basically means that they're the most impactful. So this pivotal moment in your story, that this key point of the event that you learned something from, that changed you, that gave you in some kind of insight, that should be in as much detail as possible. So scenes basically immerse the audience. They put people in the story. You want to dramatize the most important parts for the best effect. So if you're familiar with story structure, which we talked about last week, use this as a guide. So your major turning point should almost always be scenes, not summary. So the inciting incident. So this event that kind of got everything going, that's like started the chain reaction, that should be a scene. It should be detailed. The climax, the pivotal point of the story, that should most definitely be a scene because that's the most important part of the story. Or the middle point, that should be in as much detail as possible. And then the high points in each act, so this is more in the case of theater, that should be a scene instead of summary. And the pinch points should be scenes. So basically, anything that the story has been building up to, that should be a scene. That should be something that gets the most detail, the most description, sensory details to bring your reader into that story with you. Now, the things that are leading up to it, not so much. Those can be summary and it's completely fine. So, if this should be scene, what should be summary? So, we use summary when the audience needs to know the fact that maybe something happened, but they don't have to experience it. So they don't need to walk through that part with you. It's just, hey, this happened. For instance, I drove my car to the football game. I went to high school. Now I'm in this class instead of this class. So I don't need to hear all the key details of how we got there. We can sort of breeze through it. So a summary is really useful when you need to cover a broad length of time in a short amount of space, or when you need to talk about recurring events. For instance, if you're writing your essay about being bullied, you don't necessarily need to go into detail of every single instance of bullying that occurred because of from this person. Maybe you can summarize that instead. Maybe you should write a scene or in detail of this pivotal moment of when you stood up for yourself finally. But all the other instances of bullying, that can be summary. You can just kind of summarize them. You don't have to give as much detail for them. Additionally, it works really well if you're transitioning from one scene to another. Like I said, if you're going from one place to another, we don't need to hear all the details or a detailed play-by-play. It's just, oh, I was in home ec and now I'm in gym, that kind of thing. And then it's also important in providing the reader with context. So if you're writing about joining the football team, maybe you played football when you were a kid, you took a break from it because something happened. Maybe tell us that in just a sentence or two. Like, oh, I used to play football, then I got tired of it, and now I'm going to play again. So now I want to talk about introductions. So introductions, especially with this kind of paper, there's different ways you can go about it. There's no real right or wrong way to do it. Now remember, introductions, they introduce the character, the setting, they get to what the problem's going to be. But these are just some different examples of introductions that you can use. I know sometimes the hardest part of writing a paper or a story is how to get it started. So I just wanted to give you some examples. I fell in love with the minister's son the winter I turned 14. So this was an introduction from a story we read in my face-to-face class. So, oh, okay, you fell in love with the minister's son. That kind of makes me want to know the details. Like, what happened? You were 14. I assume you're not still with them. You know, what happened? What made you fall for this person? I got jumped at a pretty bad time in my life. Not that there's ever a good time. Like, you got jumped? I would like to know what happened. That makes us want to read the rest of the story. I never kissed the boy I liked behind the schoolyard fence that one March morning. So it's like, well, why didn't you kiss that boy that you liked? What happened? Did you miss your chance? What was it that stopped you from kissing this boy that you like that March morning? So these are just some examples. Again, there's really no right or wrong way to do that. Here's a longer example of an introduction. My daughter smokes. While she is doing her homework, her feet on the bench in front of her, and her calculator clicking out answers to her algebra problems. I am looking at the half-empty package of Camels tossed carelessly close at hand. Camels. I pick them up, take them into the kitchen where the light is better, and study them. They're filtered, for which I'm grateful. My heart feels terrible. I want to weep. In fact, I do weep a little, standing there by the stove, holding one of the instruments so white, so precisely rolled, that could cause my daughter's death. So this definitely makes me want to read the rest of the story. It's like, okay, you find out your kid smokes. That seems a little mundane. I'm sure a lot of parents have had to deal with that. But the way that the author describes it, her heart feels terrible. She wants to weep. She's holding an instrument of death. And so, yeah, it's a cigarette, but just the way that she describes it so vividly um, really makes me want to read the rest of the story. Like, well, what happened? Are you going to talk to her? Is she going to keep smoking? What's going to happen with this conversation between the mom and the daughter? Here's another example. On our last morning in Marshfield, the doorbell rang at 9 o'clock. So this is kind of what's called in medias res. It's like, well, why is it your last morning in Marshfield? What's going to happen? Why do you have to leave? So you just start off our last morning here, the doorbell rang at 9 o'clock. Well, that makes me want to know, why is this your last morning? Who's at the door? What brought us here? So it almost leaves you with almost a sense of secrecy. It's like, okay, well, what's going on? I want to know more. I want to know why this is your last morning. I want to know who's at the door. I want to know what is going to happen after that. And then here is another example. Sitting in a nest, I was completely covered by my costume, a large duck body surrounding my stomach and back, red polka dotted tights covering my legs, long yellow feet with a matching bill, and a red glove fit perfectly on my head. My heart beat fast as the lights went down, the casual chattering faded, the tall blue curtains separated, showing 300 shadowed faces. The music started to play, my cue to abandon my nest. So this, again, it's starting in the middle of the story, but it's like, why in the world is this person dressed like a bird? Why are they sitting in a nest and there's 300 people watching them? That's crazy. So, what's about to happen when your cue plays? I want to know, like, what is going to happen in this play and to our narrator. So that is basically just a few different ways that you can start your essay. Again, there's really no right or wrong way. You should try to get your audience's attention. Yes, you're going to introduce like the characters and the place, but there's no like rote formula that you have to use for this essay for your introductions. It is just whatever fits your story and whatever you think is going to interest the readers. So the last thing I want to talk about today or this week is editing and revising. Now, a lot of the times we get hung up on the difference between editing and revising. A lot of people think they're the same thing. So revising is when you look at the bigger picture of your essay. Did you do what you were supposed to? Do you meet the requirements of the assignment? What's the organization like? What's the overall essay like? Editing is when you look at the small things, such as punctuation, grammar, spelling, that type of thing. So editing is looking at basically just the smaller pieces of the essay. Revision is looking more at the whole thing. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So whenever you are revising, a lot of the times we revise with the focus and the thesis and the style in mind, or with the organization, or sometimes we think about what we need to expand or contract. So what needs more detail? What needs less detail? And then also, are my paragraphs clear and is my essay cohesive? Does it flow together like a story should? Or does it read like I just mashed a bunch of paragraphs together and there's no transitions from one event to the next? So whenever you are going through this, when you're thinking about revising your essay, so whenever it comes to your focus and your thesis and your style, basically you're revising to help your readers understand your thesis, your main points, and your support. So whenever I think of revising, I basically ask myself questions. And if I answer no to any of them, then that means that's something I need to go back and fix. So can the reader identify my main idea? So your main idea is what insight you gain from this, and then also just what event you're talking about. So if your reader doesn't get a sense of this insight you gained, they're not even sure what event you're talking about because it's all over the place, you definitely need to work on the focus of your essay. And then, can the reader find the support for my main idea? Do you have enough details? So you're telling this story. Do the details show your audience that this is what you went through? You're telling us you learned this from it. Well, do the descriptions in the story you tell show us how you learned this? And then where could the reader need explanation to understand my ideas fully? So when they're reading your essay, are there any parts in your story that you told that maybe they need clarification, maybe they need more detail? Oh, well, how did we get from this place to this place? You just have a character in here, I don't know who they are. They just showed up out of nowhere. So where could they need more explanation, and where might you need more details? So where might you need to add um, more detail, explanation, description to get your ideas across? Then you also want to revise with structure and organization in mind. So are there parts of my essay that don't fit with the main idea? Are there parts of my story that I can maybe get rid of? They don't fit with this point that I'm trying to get across. Do you use transitions effectively to help your readers follow your organization? So transitions are words like first, second, last, also. Using transitions helps your audience follow along with the story with you. So make sure you have transitions as you go from one event or one point to the next. Do you tell the story in the order from beginning to end? If you don't, if you started maybe with a flashback, are you clearly bringing your audience back to the beginning? Can your audience clearly follow the route, basically, that you're taking them on? So if I don't start from the beginning and end with the end, can my audience still follow along easily? And should anything be moved? Should I move something somewhere else? Should I take this out? Does this not make sense with the paragraph I'm talking about this in? That type of thing. And then expand or contract. So expanding means to like add to it. Contract means to make it smaller. So what ideas or what events need more detail? What do you need to give more descriptions to? What needs more clarity? What do you need to add details or explanation to? And then what can you contract? What can you get rid of? What should you keep? Is there anything in there? The ideas can still get across even without this sentence. This isn't vital to the story. If it's not vital to the story, why is it there? Then get rid of it. So are there details that I can get rid of in my story, but it'll still make sense even if I get rid of these details? And then lastly, you want to think about clarity and cohesion. Are you using like weak words or cliches that don't necessarily make sense? Are you using vibrant words? So vibrant words that help the audience picture what you're describing. Do you have rambling sentences that are just kind of going on, or is everything clear and to the point? So those are just some things to keep in mind as you revise, as you edit. You don't want to have a lot of these things, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it. So whenever you're editing, so again, revising is looking at the big picture. Editing is looking at more mistakes, the small things, that type of thing. So with editing, do you have misplaced modifiers? If you do, correct us, which we'll talk about that in a second. Do you use vibrant verbs? Are you describing things in such a way that make your audience experience what you did? I'm using parallel structure, avoiding weak words or cliches, and then avoiding rambling sentences. So these are just some of the most common mistakes that people make. I'm just going to show you examples and then also show you an example of how we could correct it. So using vibrant verbs. So you can use adjectives and adverbs sparingly if you use vibrant verbs. So verbs are like action words. So verbs that still give the reader a colorful sentence. So weak verbs, for instance, we could say like he ate the dry bread and he drank it down with milk. So, okay, he ate the dry bread. Yeah, that's what he's doing. He ate the dry bread. But there's more vibrant ways we could say that. For instance, we could say he munched on the dry bread. He scarfed it down. He um, hurriedly ate it. He nibbled on it. And then he didn't just drink it down, he washed it down with milk. Another example, the bus the bus dropped up the road. Or so the bus, I believe that should say maybe stopped up the road, or it dropped off a like embankment. What happened? But instead, we could say the bus emitted a tremendous crash and careened drunkenly into our trap. So they didn't just like go off the road. There was a crash, a tremendous crash, and they careened drunkenly into our trap. So yes, they're basically saying the same thing, but one uses vibrant verbs so you can actually picture it in your head. It's almost like poetry, even though you're telling a story. Now, another really common mistake are misplaced modifiers. So a modifier describes another word. So depending on where they are in the sentence, they can accidentally end up describing the wrong thing. So for instance, stapled to the gate, Patty stared at the no hunting sign. Now that looks like you're saying Patty is stapled to the gate. Patty's a person. We're not going to staple her to the gate. It's the sign that's stapled to the gate. So when we correct it, we would want stapled to be near what is actually stapled, the no hunting sign, not Patty. So Patty stared or started at the no hunting sign stapled to the gate. So what is it that's stapled to the gate? The sign, not Patty, the sign that's stapled there. Walking down the street, the town looked deserted. So walking down the street is right before the noun town. Now, can towns go walking down the street? No. Who is it that's walking down the street? Walking down the street, we saw the town look deserted. I apologize for the typo right there. So it's not the town that's walking down the street, it's we. It's whoever is narrating this, and the town looked deserted. So keep that in mind whenever you have modifiers, words that describe something else, they need to be next to what they're describing, or your sentence is going to be very, very unclear. Another common mistake is parallelism. So parallelism, think of parallel lines. They run side by side, they look alike, they have like the same angle. So in English, parallelism is the repetition of words, phrases, or sentences that have the same grammatical structure or that restate a similar idea. We see this a lot in famous quotes. So it's just a way to make your writing have rhythm and to give proper emphasis to equal sides. For instance, there's a time to be born and a time to die, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to love and a time to hate. Now, this sentence would not sound as profound as it does if it didn't have parallelism in here. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to weep, a time to laugh. So it uses repetition in this same structure to restate these ideas, and it works really well. It makes it very memorable. For instance, in Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, and then blah, blah, blah. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi. I have a dream that one day in Alabama. I have a dream that my 4 little children. So he's starting these sentences the same, and it's very memorable. That parallelism sticks with your audience and makes it memorable, makes them pay attention. So that might even be something to look for whenever you're editing and revising as well. Now, there's also weak words and cliches that you want to avoid. So, a weak word is basically a word that's too vague, it's too general to have like real meaning for the reader. So, good writers, they describe people, places, events, ideas precisely and as vividly and as descriptive as possible so that you can picture it. Weak words don't do that. Like, for instance, she is marrying a nice man. Well, a nice man, nice is a weak word because I don't know what you mean by nice. Do you mean that he's kind? Do you mean that he's a good provider? What exactly do you mean? Because what you view as nice, a nice man, might be different than what I view as a nice man. So here's a revision of that. She is marrying a considerate, polite man. Okay, so what's a nice man mean? He's considerate, he's polite. This one's clear. We don't have to guess about what you mean. You mean that he is polite and considerate. Another example might be that is a great idea. Well, your idea of a great idea might be completely different than my idea of a great idea. So what makes it great? It's innovative. It's money saving. It will save you time. It is easily accomplished. So don't just tell me it's a great idea. Tell me what is it that makes it great. Don't use these weak words that leave people unsure of what your meaning is. So that's another thing to watch as you edit and revise. And you also want to avoid cliches. So a cliche is basically a phrase or like a word that we've used over and over so much that they have just lost their meaning. It's tired, it's a worn out phrase. It's just like, oh, I've heard this all the time. Let's say something else. For instance, I was as busy as a bee all weekend. Okay, you were busy. But what's another way we could describe that without using this tired cliche? Well, I was involved in 5 different activities this weekend. Okay, well, one, that's more specific, but it's not this overused phrase. I was as busy as a bee. Here's another one. It is usually hotter than a fireplace in my grandmother's house. Okay, hotter than a fireplace. I'm not necessarily sure what you mean. Like, how hot is it? Like, is it just kind of warm? Is it sweltering? Do I feel like I'm going to die of heat stroke? Like, how hot is it? So a revised version of this might be, well, it's usually over 80 degrees in my grandmother's house. That's a lot more specific. I can envision that a lot more carefully rather than just saying it's hotter than a fireplace. It's a lot more specific. All right, the last 2 things I want to talk about, just some stylistic strategies. So again, these are just things to improve your writing. So correct misplaced modifiers, we talked about that. Use vibrant verbs. Use the active voice. So instead of saying the movies were chosen by the teacher, the movies are not the subject of the sentence. It should be the teacher. So the movies aren't the things that are choosing something. So we need to switch it. The teacher chose the movies. So who's doing the choosing? The teacher. The teacher needs to be first. And then lastly, using parallel structure, which we talked about, and then avoid using weak words and cliches. So these are things to look for when you're writing, things to avoid. So that is it for this week's lecture. So again, this week you should be working on the rough drafts of your essays. Next week, what you'll be doing, you'll have peer reviews over your reflective essays. You'll be assigned a partner through Blackboard. You'll read their draft and fill out this peer review form, which I'll talk to you more about that next week. But that's it. If you have any questions about the essay, about any of the lecture or the notes or anything, please always feel free to email me at sarahm.smith@kctcs. If you need to get in touch with me, my contact info is in Blackboard, but I hope you have a great week. And again, if you need anything, don't be afraid to ask.